There is a version of this story in which none of it ever happens. In that version, the Alpha King stays where kings are meant to stay, behind tall walls and taller manors, and he marries the woman a treaty chose for him, and no living soul ever learns that the greatest wolf in the north spent one cold autumn on his knees in the dirt, pulling weeds for a woman who did not know his name. But that version asks for a king who was content to be looked at and never once seen, and Emmerich of Cairnhold had run clean out of patience for being looked at. So if a person wished to lay blame, and people always do so love to lay blame, the fault did not belong to the king at all. It belonged to every courtier who had ever bowed to the crown and never the man beneath it. It belonged to every lord who smiled at his jokes a beat before the ending, to every servant who had learned his favorite dishes and none of his favorite silences. Bow to a man for long enough and never look him in the eye, and one morning you will wake to find he has walked out of his own castle in a borrowed coat, just to discover whether anyone in the wide world can love a set of hands that hold nothing at all. So really, when you thought it through, the whole tangle was their fault. All of it. But that comes later. It begins, as most ruinous things do, with a woman minding her own business. Sorrel had kept the walled garden at Ashmere Hold for 11 years, which was to say for most of the years she could remember being worth anything. She had come to the gate a half-starved child with no name that anyone wanted, and the old steward had looked at her the way a man looks at a stray that has followed him home, and instead of turning her out, he had put a trowel in her hand. She had never once let go of it since. The garden was the only thing in the world that had ever been hers, and she guarded it the way other people guarded gold, or children, or their good name. It was a walled square of green tucked against the south side of the hold, sheltered from the mountain wind, and in it Sorrel grew everything the great kitchens needed and a great many things they did not. She grew herbs for the healers and roots for the winter stores, and, in the far corner where no steward ever thought to look, she grew flowers for no reason at all except that a thing could be beautiful, and that seemed to her reason enough. She was not a soft woman. She had calluses where other women had rings, and a way of looking at people that made them check whether they had said something foolish. But she was soft about the garden, and everyone at Ashmere knew it, and no one teased her about it more than once. That autumn she was short 2 pairs of hands and running out of daylight. The frost was coming early off the peaks. The last of the roots wanted lifting before the ground went hard, and the 2 lads who should have helped her had both been pulled away to the stables, because the whole hold had lately gone mad with a rumor. The rumor was this: the Alpha King himself, young Emmerich of Cairnhold, was coming to Ashmere before the first snow to seal his betrothal to Lady Celestine, the Lord's own daughter, and thereby bind the great border house to the mountain throne forever. There would be a royal visit. There would be feasting. There would, the steward had said, with a look Sorrel did not like at all, be certain changes made to the grounds, so that the hold might show its best face to its king. Sorrel had heard the words certain changes to the grounds and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the frost. She was thinking about exactly that, on her knees in the cold beds with mud to her elbows, when a shadow fell across the row and did not move on. She looked up. A man stood in the garden gate. He was tall, and he stood the way tall men rarely bother to, as though he had all the time that had ever been made and no particular need to spend any of it. He wore a traveler's coat gone gray with road dust and a pack over one shoulder, and his boots were good boots worn badly, which she noted the way she noted everything, and filed away for later. His hair was dark and wanted cutting. His face was the sort of face that made a sensible woman immediately more careful, and Sorrel considered herself a very sensible woman, so she frowned at him. "Gates for deliveries," she said. "Kitchens are round the east side." "I have nothing to deliver," the man said. His voice was low and unhurried, and there was something under it that she could not place. some ease that did not match the road dust at all. I am told the hold is short of hands before the frost. I am told the one to ask is the woman who keeps this garden. You were told right on both counts. She sat back on her heels and looked him over properly, the way she would look over a horse she was not sure she wanted. You've done garden work. I have. Where? Here and there. He smiled, just slightly, as though the vagueness were a small private joke. Wherever they would have me. Sorrel had hired enough drifters to know that here and there meant nowhere he cared to say, and that a man who would not say usually had good cause not to. But she was 2 hands short and losing daylight. And there was something steady in the way he stood that she could not argue herself out of trusting. So instead of sending him off, she stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and pointed at the row beside her. "Prove it," she said. "That bed. The roots want lifting whole, not snapped. Snap one and I'll know exactly the kind of gardener you are, and you can walk back to here and there before noon." She expected him to fumble. Most of them fumbled. Instead, the stranger set down his pack, shrugged off the gray coat, folded it over the wall with a care that struck her as odd for so plain a garment, and knelt in the cold mud beside her as though he had done it every day of his life. And then his hands went into the earth, and Sorrel forgot for a moment to be suspicious of him, because the man knew soil. He knew it the way she knew it, by feel, testing the give of the ground before he ever pulled, working the root loose from all sides so it came up long and pale and unbroken. He laid it in the basket whole and reached for the next without being told. They worked the row in silence for a while. It was, she would think much later, the first honest silence anyone had shared with her in a long while, and she had not even known to be grateful for it. Once, an old man came shuffling through the gate, one of the aged servants the hold kept on out of habit more than use, lost and blinking in the wrong yard as the old sometimes were. Sorrel had seen the kitchen boys laugh at poor Garin before, and had cuffed them for it. She braced now for the stranger to laugh too, the way strangers did. Instead, Rowan set down his root, rose without a word, and went to the old man, and took his elbow gently, and asked him where he had meant to be, and listened to the long muddled answer as though it were the only matter in all the world. Then he walked him the whole way back to the kitchen door, unhurried, and came back, and knelt again in the mud and picked up exactly where he had left off, and never once mentioned it, as though kindness were a private thing a person did not display. Sorrel watched all of it over the row and said nothing. But something in her, some careful locked thing, turned a quarter turn toward him without her leave. "You'll do," she said at last, which from Sorrel was practically a song of praise. "High words," the stranger murmured. "I'll treasure them." She snorted. She could not help it. Then, because the rumor had been sitting in her chest all morning like a swallowed stone, and because this was a stranger who would be gone by spring and would carry her grievances nowhere that mattered, Sorrel found herself talking. "You've come at a mad time," she said. "You'd not know it to look at me on my knees in the muck, but the whole hold's lost its wits. The king's coming." "Is he?" the stranger said. "The Alpha King himself. Coming to wed the Lord's daughter and shake all our hands and eat all our winter stores and ride off again feeling very generous about it." She wrenched a root loose harder than she needed to. "And do you know what they mean to do to make the place fine enough for him? They mean to tear up this garden. Level it. Put a stone pavilion right across the bed so His Majesty has somewhere pretty to stand while he signs a paper." "Perhaps he does not know," the stranger said mildly. "Kings are seldom told the price of the things done in their name." "Then he should ask." She jabbed the trowel into the dirt. "That's the whole of it, isn't it? A man who's never dug a day in his life, deciding whose home gets dug up. He's never once set foot here. He's never seen this garden. He doesn't know my name, and he never will. And yet his whim comes down the mountain and lands on me like weather, and I'm meant to smile and be honored. Honored. She shook her head. I'll tell you what I think of your alpha king. I think a man who lets the ground be torn up beneath people he's never met is no kind of king at all. He's just a portrait that eats. She waited for the stranger to laugh, or to look shocked, the way the kitchen girls looked shocked when she talked like this. He did neither. He had gone very still beside her, his hands quiet in the earth, and when she glanced over she found him watching her with an expression she could not read at all, something caught between amusement and a kind of hunger that was not for food. "You'd say that to his face, would you?" he said quietly. "I'd say worse to his face," Sorrel said, "if his face ever bothered to come where I could reach it." She stood and dusted her knees. "But it won't. Men like that never do. Now, you've earned your supper and a corner of the loft. What do they call you?" The stranger looked at her for one beat longer than the question needed. "Rowan," he said. "Rowan." She nodded. "Welcome to Ashmere. Break a root and I'll break you. Come on, the light's going." And she turned and walked up the path toward the hold. And so she did not see the man she had just hired sit back on his heels in the cold beds of her garden and press one dirt-streaked hand briefly over his own mouth, the way a man does when he has heard something he will not be able to forget. That night, in the dark of the stable loft, when the hold had gone quiet and even the dogs had settled, the new gardener drew from an inner pocket a thing that no gardener should own. It was small and heavy and warm from his body, and when the moon came through the loft slats, it woke a dull gold shine along the face of it. A signet. On its face, worn but unmistakable, ran the mark that every soul in the north had knelt to at one time or another. The running wolf of Cairnhold. Emmerich of the mountain throne, Alpha King of all the north, turned his own seal over in his fingers in the straw of a borrowed loft, and thought about a woman with mud to her elbows who did not know his name, and had 1 month before he would have to ride back down the mountain and become, in front of everyone, the very portrait that eats. He had come to Ashmere for a cold and practical reason. He had come to look, in secret, at the house, and the woman a treaty meant to tie to his throne, to weigh Lady Celestine with his own eyes before he bound the whole north to her, because a king who signs blind deserves whatever he signs. That was the reason. It was a good reason. It had lasted exactly until a woman in the mud had called him a portrait that eats, and meant every word of it, and had looked at him as though he were only a man, because to her he was, and something in his chest that had been asleep since the crown first came down on his head had opened one eye. He put the signet away. He did not sleep beautifully that night, at any inconvenient time at all. Sorrel had expected to regret the drifter by morning. She generally regretted her softer impulses by morning. Instead, she came down to the garden at first light and found the last of the cold beds already lifted, the roots basketed and sorted, the tools cleaned and hung, and Rowan leaning against the south wall with the particular patience of a man who had been up for hours and saw no reason to mention it. "You don't sleep," she said. "I sleep beautifully," he said. "I simply do it at inconvenient times." She did not know what to do with a hired hand who worked like that and talked like that, so she did what she always did with things she did not understand. She gave him more work. Over the next several days she set him at every miserable task the season offered, the mucking of the beds and the mending of the cold frames and the hauling of stone, and he did all of it without complaint, and most of it better than she could have. And worse, he did it with a kind of quiet attention to the small forgotten corners of the place that she had thought only she noticed. He found the flower bed in the far corner, the one she grew for no reason, and instead of laughing at it, he asked what each thing was called, and remembered. He asked other things too in the long hours of work, and she noticed after a while that they were always the right questions. Not who ran the hold, nor how many men it could put in the field. The questions a spy might ask. Though later she would wonder about that. He asked who went hungry when the stores ran short. He asked whether the healers had what they needed for the winter cough. He asked what became of the aged servants when they could no longer lift a pail. He asked as though the answers weighed on him, as though somewhere he had the power to mend the things she named, which was of course absurd in a drifter, and Sorrel answered him honestly because no one else in 11 years had thought the questions worth the asking at all. "You care a great deal," she told him once, suspicious of it, for a man passing through. "I have found," Rowan said, turning a bulb over in his brown hands, "that a place tells you what it truly is by how it treats the people who can do nothing for it. I like to know what a place truly is." She had no answer for that. She thought about it for 3 days. Sorrel told herself she was watching him because a wise woman watched a stranger. She did not examine too closely the fact that she had begun to look for him first thing on coming through the gate. Her friend Lynette, who ran messages between the kitchens and had opinions about everyone, noticed before Sorrel would have liked. "Your new lad," Lynette said, cornering her by the well with 2 pails and a grin. "The tall one. Where's he from then?" "Here and there," Sorrel said. "That's not a place." "It's the only place he'll name, so it'll have to be." Sorrel took a pail. "He works. That's all I need from him." Lynette's grin widened in a way Sorrel did not care for at all. "Only, Emmett says he's never seen a drifter with hands so soft under the calluses. And he stands like a lord. And the big gray wolfhound in the yard, the one that bites everyone, went and put its head in his lap like it had known him 100 years. She shrugged. "I'm only saying. Odd is all." "You're only saying because you've nothing better to do than say," Sorrel told her, and carried her water away before her own face could give anything up. But the words followed her all the same. "He stands like a lord." She had thought it herself, that first day at the gate, and had talked herself out of it. And now here it was again, waiting. That evening she caught herself doing a foolish thing. She had cut, from the far corner, a single late bloom, a small stubborn white thing that had no business flowering so near the frost, and she had meant to leave it on the sill of the loft where the new gardener slept. The way a person leaves a thing for someone she has decided, without quite admitting it, to be kind to. She stood with it in her hand a long moment. Then she called herself 11 kinds of fool and put it in water on her own sill instead, where it could shame her in private. She was not a woman who left flowers for drifters. She told herself this very firmly. The bloom, on her sill, said nothing, and went on being beautiful for no reason, which was the one argument she had never once learned how to win. She might have chased the thought further. She did not get the chance, because that was the afternoon the whole thing became real. She was in the garden when she heard it. The long, high call of a horn from the watchtower, and then another. The notes that meant riders on the mountain road flying the wrong colors to ignore. Sorrel climbed the garden wall, because the garden wall was the fastest high place she knew, and shaded her eyes against the pale autumn sun, and saw them coming up the switchbacks. A column. Banners. The green and gold of the crown itself, small with distance but unmistakable, snapping in the wind above a line of mounted men in the king's own livery. Not the king. Not yet. This was the advance of him, the outriders and the heralds, and the men who came ahead of a royal visit to measure a house against its promises. But it meant the thing was no longer a rumor 2 weeks off. It meant the mountain had begun to move, and everything it touched would be rearranged, and Sorrel felt her stomach drop straight through the wall she stood on, because she knew exactly which corner of Ashmere the king's men would want cleared first. She turned to call for Rowan, to make him climb up and see it too, to have someone to be afraid with. But the garden below her was empty. The tools lay where he had set them down. The gate stood open. Sometime between the first horn and the second, without a word, the new gardener, who worked like a lord and slept at inconvenient times, had simply, silently, gone. Sorrel found she did not like being afraid alone, which annoyed her, because she had been proud of being able to do most things alone for most of her life. She spent the rest of that day at the gate with the rest of the hold, watching the king's advance ride in under the raised portcullis, all shining mail and cold courtesy, and she looked for Rowan in the crowd of gawping servants, and did not find him there either. The heralds were received in the great hall. Word came down through the kitchens the way word always did, faster than any herald. His Majesty would arrive within the month. His Majesty's comfort would be the first concern of every soul at Ashmere. And, as Sorrel had known in her bones it would, word came down that the south garden was to be surveyed on the morrow for its clearing, so that a pavilion of honor might stand where the beds now stood. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow room over the potting shed and listened to the strange horses stamping in the strange dark, and felt the only thing she had ever owned being measured for its grave. And a little before dawn, when she could bear the walls no longer, she went down to the garden to be with it while it was still hers, and she found Rowan there. He was standing in the middle of the beds in the gray light, and he was not dressed as he had been. The road coat was gone. What he wore now was plain still, but it was clean and well cut. The clothes of a man who had spent the last day somewhere finer than a stable loft. And Sorrel stopped at the gate with her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "You left?" she said. It came out more wounded than she meant it to. "I did," he said. "I am sorry for it. There was a thing I had to see to, and no way to explain it that would have made sense. You missed the king's men riding in. You missed the survey order. They're going to tear it up, Rowan. Tomorrow they measure it, and then they tear it up. And there's not a thing I can do because I'm a gardener and they're the crown, and the crown doesn't listen to gardeners." She heard her own voice crack and hated it. "So I don't much care what you had to see to." He crossed the beds toward her, slow, careful, the way a person moves near something wounded, and he stopped a pace off. And he looked at her with that same unreadable weight he had looked at her with on the first day. "What if it were not torn up?" he said quietly. "What if I told you I know a man with the ear of the king, a man who could see this garden spared? Would you let me try?" She laughed because it was absurd, because he was a drifter who slept in her loft and he was talking about the ear of the king. "You," she said, "you know a man with the ear of the king." "I know him better than anyone living," Rowan said, and he did not smile when he said it, and something in the plainness of it stopped her laughter cold. "Who are you?" she said. It was not the first time the question had risen in her, but it was the first time she had let it out into the air. Truly, a drifter does not fold a road coat as though it were ermine. A drifter does not ask who goes hungry. The wolfhound that bites everyone lays its head in your lap. And now here you stand in my garden before dawn in a rich man's clothes, telling me you know the king better than anyone living. She took a step toward him instead of away, which surprised them both. "So who are you, Rowan, if that is even the name your mother gave you?" For a moment she thought he would tell her. She saw it move across his face, the wanting to, and under it something that looked almost like fear, and she understood with a lurch that whatever the truth was, it was large, and that telling it would cost him something he was not sure he could afford to lose. "I am a man," he said at last, low, "who would give a great deal to have met you as no one at all, before the rest of it, before it was too late to be only that." It was not an answer. It was, somehow, the truest thing anyone had ever said to her. They stood there in the gray dawn a pace apart, and the strangest thing was happening in Sorrel's chest, a warmth, a pull, a sense of steadiness where she had felt only fear a moment before, as though some part of her that had no words had recognized some part of him and gone quiet with relief. She did not understand it. She had felt it faintly since the first day and pushed it down every time. Now, this close, in the hush before the light, it was very hard to push down at all. His eyes moved over her face. He lifted one hand, slowly, as though to brush a smear of dirt from her cheek, and she did not step back. And that was when the horn on the watchtower blew again, the long single note of a great arrival, and over Rowan's shoulder, far down the mountain road where it broke free of the trees, Sorrel saw a second column climbing toward Ashmere. Not the king's green and gold this time. A different banner, a different house, rich and dark and flying fast. The banner of a great lady come early to a betrothal that was not yet sealed. Rowan turned to look at it, and Sorrel watched every trace of the gardener drain out of his face and leave behind something still and kingly and afraid. Rowan moved first. He stepped back from her, and the space where his hand had almost been went cold, and he did not look at Sorrel again, but at the column climbing the road as though it were a thing he had been dreading for a long while. "You have to go up to the hold," he said. It was not a question, and there was a new note under it, low and level, the voice of a man giving an order he was used to being obeyed. "That's the coast colors," Sorrel said, shading her eyes. "That's Lady Celestine's escort. She's coming home." She had never met the Lord's daughter. Celestine had been fostered away on the coast since she was a girl, and the hold spoke of her the way it spoke of weather in another country. "She's early. The betrothal's not for weeks yet." "No," Rowan agreed softly. "She is early." And something in how he said it told Sorrel that the lady's coming had rearranged some plan of his, and that he did not like it. Then he was moving, gathering the road coat off the wall, and he paused only once at the gate. "The garden," he said. "Do nothing to it. Do not let them measure it tomorrow. Delay them however you can. One day, only one, and I promise you it will not be torn up. Will you trust me that far?" It was the most absurd request she had ever been handed, and she should have laughed at it. Instead, she looked at his face, at the steadiness in it, and heard herself say, "One day." And he was gone through the gate before she could ask him a single one of the questions crowding her throat. She delayed them. She was good at delaying men who wished to measure things, having spent 11 years defending her beds from stewards with grand ideas. She met the survey party at the gate the next morning with a long, grave account of soft ground and buried drains and the ruinous cost of laying stone over a spring, and she talked until the advance men grew bored and went to measure something easier, and she won her one day and told herself it would come to nothing. It did not come to nothing. That evening, a man she had never seen came down to the garden, a spare, quiet man with a soldier's way of standing and no livery at all, who introduced himself only as Ansel, and asked her not a single needless question. "The garden is to stand," Ansel told her, "by order from the king's own party. It is to be kept and made ready as a garden of honor for His Majesty's coming, and you are to have whatever hands and coin you require to make it so. No stone will be laid across your beds." He looked at her a moment with something that might, in a less careful man, have been amusement. "You have a friend, it seems, closer to the crown than a gardener has any business having." And then he too was gone, and Sorrel stood in her spared garden in the dusk and did not feel saved at all. She felt watched. A drifter did not spare a garden by order of the king's own party. A drifter could not do that. Rowan had done that, or Rowan had asked it of someone who could. And either way, the ground had shifted under her again, and she was tired of standing on ground that would not hold still. She met Lady Celestine 2 days after that. She had expected to dislike her. It is easy to dislike a woman who is to be handed a king while you kneel in the mud, and Sorrel had prepared a small store of dislike in advance, the way she stored roots for winter. But the lady who came to see the Garden of Honor was not what she had stored dislike against. Celestine was pale and tired from the road, and younger than the Hold's talk had made her, and she walked the bed slowly, and stopped a long while at the far corner where the flowers grew for no reason, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet. "They grow this for no purpose," Celestine said. "Only to be lovely." "They do," said Sorel. "How strange," the lady murmured, "to be allowed to exist for no purpose but that." She said it without envy and without complaint, the way a person states a fact about a country they will never be permitted to visit, and Sorel understood all at once that the woman she had prepared to hate was as much a thing being moved across a board as she was herself, only with better clothes and less say in it. Celestine had not chosen the king. The king had not chosen Celestine. Somewhere above both of them, a treaty had chosen for them, and here they all were. "Do you know him?" Sorel asked, before she could stop herself. "The king. What manner of man he is?" Celestine gave a small, tired smile. "No one knows him. That is rather the trouble. I have met him twice, at court, across a great deal of gold. He was courteous. He said the correct things in the correct order, and I could not have told you one true word he thought behind any of them." She touched a late bloom with one gloved finger. "They say he is clever. They say he is kind, when it costs him nothing. I am to marry a rumor and hope the man inside it is bearable." She looked up. "Forgive me. I should not speak so to a stranger. It is only that you kept a garden alive for no reason, but that it should live, and I find I would rather talk to you than to anyone in that hall." "Thank you for keeping it," Celestine said, and left. And Sorel found her small store of dislike had spoiled and gone to nothing. That should have been the whole of the day's trouble. It was not, because on her way back through the storerooms that night, Sorel found the steward where the steward should not have been. Aldous had raised her. He had put the trowel in her hand when she was a nameless child at the gate, and in 11 years she had never once had cause to doubt him. So when she found him bent over the account ledgers by a single candle at an hour when honest men slept, she felt not suspicion but concern, and went to him. "You'll ruin your eyes," she said. He startled badly. That was the first wrong thing. Aldous did not startle. He closed the ledger over his hand too quickly, and that was the second. And when he turned to her, his fatherly smile arrived a half-breath late. And that was the third. "Sorrel," he said, "you move like a cat, child. It's only the stores. The visit has us all in knots." He steered her gently toward the door, one warm hand on her shoulder as he had steered her 100 times, and she let herself be steered, because he was Aldous. But at the door she glanced back, and saw that the ledger he had closed so fast was the requisition book, the one that tracked what the hold ordered against what the hold received. And she remembered her own drunk grievance to a stranger in a garden. "We order grain, and it goes where? Gone." She had said those words as a joke, or near enough, a tired guard's complaint dressed up as treason after too long untangling supply lists that never balanced. She had blamed the far-off king for it, because the far-off king was an easy thing to blame. But standing in the dark storeroom with the guttering candle and the closed book, and the memory of Aldous flinching, she felt the shape of a colder thought move underneath. What if the lists had never balanced because someone at Ashmere did not mean them to? What if the grain that grew legs and the spears that never came had walked off in a direction, toward a purpose? And what if the man who kept the accounts was the same man who had taught her gently all her life never to look too hard at them? She put the thought away from her, because it was monstrous, because it was Aldous, but she did not quite manage to make it stay away. She went to bed with two puzzles laid side by side in the dark: who Rowan truly was, and why the man who had raised her had shut a ledger like a guilty thing. She did not yet see how the two might be the same puzzle. But she had begun, without meaning to count. The making of the Garden of Honor should have been the happiest work of Sorrel's life. And the maddening thing was that in spite of everything it very nearly was. She had coin now, and hands, and Ansel's quiet word behind her that no one at the hold dared cross. She widened the paths and cleared the choked beds and set in the last hardy blooms the season would allow. And she built, at the heart of it all, a thing she had wanted to build for 11 years and never been permitted. A circle of stone seats around the old sundial where a person might simply sit, among growing things, and be still. And through all of it, Rowan worked at her side, for he had come back the morning after Ansel's visit as though he had never left, and taken up a spade without a word. And she had let him, because she had stopped pretending, at least to herself, that she wanted him anywhere but near. She told herself she kept him close to watch him. This was even partly true. She watched him lift stone and knew no drifter had a back schooled like that. She watched him speak to Ansel once across the yard, only a few words, and watched the spare, hard soldier dip his head half an inch before he caught himself, the ghost of a bow, to a man in a gardener's coat. She gathered these things the way she gathered evidence of a garden pest, patiently, without yet naming the creature. But somewhere in the gathering, the watching changed under her, the way ice changes to water without any single moment you can point to. And one afternoon she looked up from the sundial to find she had been watching the line of his throat in the low sun for a good while, and had not been thinking about evidence at all. He caught her at it. He always caught her at it. "You've stopped working," he said, not looking up, a smile in it. "I'm thinking," she said. "You're looking at me. I can do both. Unlike some, I've a functioning mind." But her face had gone warm, and he laughed low, and the sound of it did something to the backs of her knees that she chose not to examine. They fell, in those days, into the easy shorthand of people who work well together, half sentences and pass tools and long stretches where neither spoke at all. He was the only person she had ever met who did not fill her silences, who let a quiet be a quiet, and she had not known how much she wanted that until she had it. In the evenings, when the light went and the others drifted off to supper, they lingered, the two of them, among the beds. He would ask about her flowers and she would tell him more than the names, the way this one had come from a cutting smuggled in a dead woman's pocket, the way that one bloomed only the year after a hard frost, as though it needed grief to open. He listened to all of it as though it were statecraft. No one had ever made the small, true things of her life feel large before. It was not all warmth. Twice in those days, the wrongness she had felt in the storeroom put out a hand and touched her. The first time, a barrel of lamp oil meant for the hold went missing from the very stores she had seen Aldous bent over, and turned up 3 days later in a locked cellar beneath the old East Tower, a place no honest work had any use for, stacked with a great deal more than a barrel. Sorrel saw it only for a moment, through a door left carelessly ajar, before Aldous himself appeared at her elbow, smiling, and drew the door shut, and told her the Tower stores were his own affair and not a gardener's, in a voice that was still kind and was, for the first time in 11 years, also a warning. The second time was worse, because the second time someone nearly died. A section of the old scaffolding along the great hall came down during the day's work, a whole face of it, timbers and stone together, into the yard where a dozen folk were passing. It should have killed someone. It very nearly killed Emmett, the stable lad, who was crossing beneath it with a pail, and would have, except that Rowan crossed the yard faster than Sorrel had ever seen a man move, and had the boy by the collar and out from under it before the first timber struck the ground. He did it without thought, the way a soldier does a thing his body has done 1,000 times, and then he stood over the boy in the settling dust with his chest heaving and his eyes gone flat, and scanning the high windows above. Hunting. And it was not the face of a man who thought a scaffold had merely fallen. It was the face of a man who wished to know who had pushed it. The ropes, when Sorrel examined them later because no one else thought to, had not frayed. They had been cut most of the way through and left to finish on their own. She should have taken this to the steward. The steward kept the safety of the hold. But she had seen the steward shut a ledger like a thief and stack a cellar he would not name. And so for the first time in her life, Sorrel did not take her trouble to Aldous. She took it, that night, to the drifter she could not explain, and found him already awake in the empty garden as though he had been waiting for her. And she told him everything, the oil and the cellar and the cut ropes, and watched him listen with that still, weighing calm that was not a gardener's calm at all. "You believe someone means harm here," he said when she had finished. During the visit. "I believe someone already does," she said. "I believe my steward is lying to me, and I've never in my life had cause to think it. And I don't know what to do with a world where Aldous lies." Her voice cracked on the name. "You keep asking me to trust you. Fine. I'll trade. I'll trust you if you tell me one true thing. Who are you? That Ansel bows to your coat? That a garden stands because you say so? One true thing, Rowan. I'm owed one true thing." He looked at her for a long moment in the dark, and she saw him weigh it, the whole heavy secret of himself, saw him come nearer to setting it down than he ever had. "The truest thing I have," he said at last, and his voice was rough, "is that I did not come here to be a gardener, and I stayed to be one because of you. Everything else I am, I would trade, to keep having been only that, here, with you, a little longer. That is true. I swear it on the only thing I have left that is not borrowed." It was not the answer to the question she had asked. It was the answer to a question she had not dared ask, and it undid her. She had spent 11 years being no one's, careful and locked, and hers alone, and she stood in her spared garden in the dark and felt the whole of that carefulness come loose in her chest at once. This was not a scheme. Whatever else the man was hiding, this was not that. He wanted her for no reason but wanting, the way she grew flowers for no reason but that they were lovely, and she was so tired of pretending she did not want him back. So she stopped pretending. She crossed the dark between them, and she did not step back this time, and neither did he. It was not gentle, the first of it. 11 years of carefulness coming apart at once, and then it was. Once the first storm of it had passed. In the dark of her spared garden, Sorrel let herself be held by a man whose name she did not truly know, and found, to her own astonishment, that she was not afraid. She would be afraid later. There would be time enough, and to spare, for being afraid. For that one night, among the growing things she had kept alive for no reason but that they should live, she let herself simply be glad. They had 8 days before the king arrived, and Sorrel spent them being happier than she had ever been afraid to be. She knew it could not last. Some clear, cold part of her, the part that had lifted roots whole for 11 years by knowing exactly how much a thing could take before it broke, knew that a drifter with secrets and a king coming down the mountain did not add to a life a woman kept. But the rest of her had never been happy before, not like this, not warm all the way through, and it turned out that a person starved that long will take 8 days of it and ask no questions, and be glad. He came to her in the loft at night now, and left before the horns of the dawn watch. And in between there was a sweetness to it that surprised them both, a laughing ease under all that gathering dark. He learned the names of her flowers, and she learned the old scars on his back, and asked him about none of them, and he told her about none of them, and it was, for 8 days, enough. On the 4th of those days it rained, a hard, cold mountain rain that drove them both under the eaves of the potting shed, and rather than wait it out in silence, he taught her a game of stones he swore was played in every guardroom in the north, and cheated at it outrageously, and lost anyway, because she caught him cheating and made him pay a forfeit for every stone. The forfeits were foolish. He had to name the ugliest thing at court, and did, at great length, until she was laughing too hard to breathe. He had to sing, and could not, and the sound was so dreadful that the wolfhound came in from the rain to see what was dying. He had to tell her a true thing about himself, and went still a moment, and then said only that he had been lonely for longer than he could remember, and had not known it until he stopped being lonely, here, in a garden, in the rain. She let that forfeit stand. She did not make him pay another. She only moved closer under the eaves until the rain had them boxed in together, warm in the cold, and neither of them minded the weather at all. Once, lying with her head on his chest in the grayest hour, she said the thing she would spend a long while afterward wishing she had never said, only because of how much it would cost when he remembered it. "You've nothing," she told him, tracing an old scar. "No land, no name you'll speak, likely no coin but what I pay you. I've thought about it. I don't care." She felt him go still under her cheek. "I've had nothing my whole life, and I know exactly what it's worth, which is nothing, which is everything depending. I'd take you as you are, a gardener, a nobody. I'd take the man and hang the rest. I only want you to know that I see you. Whatever else you're hiding, I see the man, and it's the man I want." For a long moment he did not speak. When she tilted her head up, his eyes were bright and wet in the dark, and his arms had tightened around her hard enough to ache, and he pressed his mouth to her hair and said, in a voice she had never heard him use, "You do not know what you have just given me. You cannot know." And she thought it a lover's foolishness, and let herself be held, and did not understand that she had just told a king the one thing no living soul had ever told him, which was that he was worth loving with nothing in his hands at all. He held her until the sky grayed toward the horns, and if his hold had something desperate in it, she took it for tenderness, because she did not yet have the one key that would turn all of that fortnight's small strangenesses into sense. She fell asleep against him certain, for the first time in her life, of a single, simple thing, that in the morning he would still be there, and still be hers, and that whatever the wide world did to them, they would meet it the way they had met everything else, as two nobodies, together. She was wrong about every part of that before the sun was properly up. The morning the king came, the whole of Ashmere rose before dawn. Sorrel had thought she would not have to be there. She was a gardener. But the garden of honor was to be shown to his majesty first of all the hold. Its restored heart made the very stage of his arrival, and so she was scrubbed and put into a clean gray dress and set at the edge of her own beds, with the household ranked around the paths, to stand among the bowing and be part of the fine face the hold showed its king. She looked for Rowan in the crowd and did not find him, and felt the first threat of a fear she could not name. The horns sounded. The great gate opened, and the Alpha King of all the North rode into the garden that Sorel had built, at the head of his own men, with the household folding to their knees before him, like a field going down under wind. She did not kneel at once. She was staring. He was in green and gold. He wore the running wolf at his breast in worked silver, and a circlet on his dark hair that wanted cutting, and he sat the great horse with that same unhurried certainty she had watched lift stone in her beds for a fortnight, because it was the same certainty, because it was the same back, the same throat, the same mouth, the same hands she had traced in the dark only that morning. The face above the king's collar was a face she had kissed. The man the whole hold was kneeling to was the man who had promised her, in her own loft, that he would trade everything he was to have been only a gardener a little longer. The ground did not so much give way beneath Sorrel as simply cease to have ever been there. And then the worst of it, the part that would live behind her eyes for a long time after. Lady Celestine was handed down from her mount to stand at his side, pale and lovely, and dressed for a betrothal, and a herald lifted his voice over the kneeling household and named them to one another before the whole assembled hold. His Majesty Emmerich of Cairnhold, Alpha King of the North, and the Lady Celestine of Ashmere, come at last to be his queen. The king's pale eyes moved once across the ranked faces of the household. They found Sorrel, standing alone and unkneeling among the flowers she had grown for no reason at all. And she watched the man she loved look at her over the head of the woman he was to marry, and she saw in his face that every word of it was true. For a heartbeat that seemed to have no end, she did not kneel, and could not, her body simply refusing the command, and around her the last few who had waited on the household's lead began to falter and glance her way. A gardener standing upright in a sea of bent backs, and she understood that in another breath she would be marked, the one soul at Ashmere who would not go down for her king. It was Linnet who saved her. Her friend, kneeling in the next row, reached out without turning her head and caught the hem of Sorrel's gray dress and pulled hard once, and Sorrel's knees unlocked, and she went down into the cold gravel of the path she had raked smooth with her own hands, among the blooms she had grown for no reason, and bowed her head to the man who had lain in her loft that very morning and let her believe he had nothing in the world. She did not weep. She was proud of that afterward, when there was very little else to be proud of. She knelt in her own garden with her face gone to stone, and let the whole beautiful lie ride past her on its tall horse, and she did not make a single sound. The king sent for her at dusk. She thought about not going. She thought about it a long while, standing in the potting shed with her hands flat on the cold bench, listening to the feast being laid in the great hall for a betrothal that was not yet sealed. But a summons from a king was not a thing a gardener could refuse, and besides, some furious part of her wanted to stand in front of him and make him say the whole of it to her face, so that she could hate him with the full weight of the truth, and not merely the shape of it. Ansel brought her up by a servant's stair to a small private chamber, and then Ansel went out, and shut the door, and left her alone with the man she had known as Rowan. He had sent the others away. He stood by the cold hearth in his fine dark clothes with the circlet gone from his hair, and for a moment, without the crown, in the low light, he was so exactly the man who had knelt in her beds that her whole chest ached with it before her anger could get its feet under it. "Sorrel," he said. "Your Majesty," she said, and watched him flinch at it and was glad. "Do not, please, not you." "What would you have me call you?" She kept her voice flat, because flat was the only thing holding. "Rowan. That was a lie. My lord. That's a lie of a smaller kind. I've only the two lies to choose from. Tell me which you prefer, and I'll use it." He closed his eyes briefly. "I deserved that. You deserve a great deal more than that. But I'm a gardener, not a queen, so it's all I'm permitted." She made herself look at him. "So say it. All of it. You owe me that much, and it's the last thing I'll ever ask you for." "Why?" And so he told her. He told her he had come to Ashmere because the crown's coin had been bleeding north for 2 years, and no accounting had ever found where, and because a king who rides in with banners sees only what a house wishes him to see, and he had wanted, for once in his life, to see a thing plainly. He had come to weigh the betrothal with his own eyes, the treaty his father had drawn before he died, before he bound the whole North to a house he did not trust. And he had put on a road coat and a plain name and walked in through the garden gate because the garden gate was the one door in Ashmere where no one would perform for him. "And I asked you questions," he said, low. "That first fortnight, who went hungry, where the stores went, who held the keys when the steward was away. I told myself it was the work I came to do." He made himself hold her eyes. "It was the work I came to do. That part is true, and I will not stand here and pretend it away to make you think better of me." And there it was. She had come up the stairs still hoping, some small traitor part of her, that she had it wrong. She did not have it wrong. Every warm evening among the beds, every question she had answered gladly because at last someone thought her life worth asking about. He had been counting the same things she had, only for the crown. She had thought he was interested in her. He had been interested in her keys. All of it, she said, and her voice came out very quiet. The questions, the listening, me telling you about the cutting in the dead woman's pocket as though it mattered. You were working the whole time. At first. He took a step toward her and she did not move, and he stopped. Sorrel. At first. And then, somewhere I stopped counting your keys and started counting the hours until you would come back through the gate. And I did not even notice the moment it changed. Only that one day the disguise had stopped being a disguise and become the only place in my life I had ever been happy. That is also true. Both are true. I know you do not want them both to be true. They are. And her. Sorrel's voice was very low. Lady Celestine, you lay in my loft and let me call you a nobody with nothing, and downstairs a lady of the coast was unpacking her betrothal gowns. When were you going to tell me that? On the morning of your wedding? Or were you simply going to ride back down the mountain one day and let me wake to an empty loft and work it out on my own? He was silent, which was answer enough. I was going to break it, he said finally. The betrothal. I had already decided it. It was never sealed. And I came to weigh it and found I could not do it. Could not bind the North to a woman I felt nothing for when there was a woman in a garden I felt everything for. I was going to break it, Sorrel. I swear it. And I was a coward about the timing, because every day I did not tell you was another day you would look at me the way you looked at me, and I could not give it up. That is not an excuse. It is only the shape of the wrong I did you. I hoarded your love like a thief, because I knew that the moment you had the truth of me, I would lose it. Then you knew right, she said, because you have. Do not, she said, tell me what became real when you let me lie in your arms and give you the only thing I have ever had to give. I told you I would take you as a nobody. I told you I saw the man. Her voice cracked clean through at last, and she hated it, and could not stop it. Do you understand what you took from me? I have loved exactly one thing in my life, for no reason but that it was worth loving, and it was you. And you were a king the whole time, and you were promised to another woman the whole time, and you let me spend it. You let me spend the only thing I had on a man who had everything and told me he had nothing. He had gone gray. The bond is real, he said, and his voice was not a king's voice at all now. That is what you felt from the first day. That steadiness. I felt it too, the moment you told a hooded stranger he was no kind of king. It does not choose by rank, Sorrel. It does not consult a treaty. It chose you. And I would give the throne itself to. It does not matter if it is real. She was at the door now. She did not remember crossing to it. A true thing built inside a lie is still standing inside a lie. You looked at me every single day and let me love a man who did not exist. A bond does not wash that out. Nothing washes that out. She got the door open. I'm glad I met you, Rowan. That is the cruelest part. I'm glad, and I'll never forgive you. And both of those are true. So now you know how it feels. Sorrel, he said, and there was something breaking in it. I need you. Please. She stood in the doorway with her back to him so that he would not see her face. You needed my keys, she said. You'll manage without me. Kings always do. And she walked out and went down the dark servants' stair to find the one person in all of Ashmere who had never once lied to her, the man who had raised her, the man she trusted with her whole broken heart. She went to find Aldous. She found him in his rooms behind the counting house, and the moment his door opened and he saw her face, he opened his arms, And she went into them the way she had gone into them at 8 years old, with a skinned knee. And she wept at last, the tears she had refused the king, into the shoulder of the man who had taught her everything. "There now," Aldous murmured, one hand smoothing her hair. "There now, child, I know. I have known since the first night, and I could not find the way to tell you, and I am sorry for it. He used you. A king does not see people like us. We are tools to a man like that, and he has put you down now that the work is done." "You knew," she said into his shoulder. "I knew what he was." Aldous drew back and held her at arm's length, and his kind face was grave. "Sorrel, I will tell you a thing now that I have carried alone, because you are grown, and because after tonight you will understand why it had to be done. That man is not fit to hold the North. I have seen the proof of it with my own eyes. Do you know what he did, 3 winters past, to the old lord of the river country who would not bend the knee? He put the man's whole household to the torch. Women, the little ones, all of them in the night, and called it a fever after, and I have the letters that prove it. And that is the man you gave your heart to. And that is the man this house is about to crown by marriage." Sorrel went very still in his hands, because it was a good lie. It was a lie built to do exactly what it was doing, to take her grief and her fury, and forge them into a blade and put the hilt in Aldous' hand. And it would have worked. It would have worked perfectly, except for one small thing. 3 winters past, the river country had flooded. The whole of the North knew it. The old lord of the river country had drowned with half his people when the spring melt came down the valley in the dark, and there had been no household to burn because there had been no household left, and the young king had sent grain and men down the mountain to the survivors. And Sorrel knew this because she had helped load the grain carts herself, from these very stores, 3 winters past. There were no letters. There could be no letters. Aldous was lying to her face, gently, the way he had perhaps been lying to her face her whole life, and in the space of one breath every scattered thing she had been counting fell into a single terrible column and added itself up. The requisition book shut too fast, the oil in the tower cellar, and a great deal more than oil. The ropes cut most of the way through. The king who had come in secret because the crown's coin was bleeding north to a purpose no accounting could find. The purpose was standing in front of her with his hand still warm on her shoulder, and it had raised her, and it meant to kill a king tonight. She did not let it reach her face. She had spent 11 years keeping her face still over a breaking heart, and she spent that skill now, all of it at once. She let her eyes fill. She let her chin tremble. She let the daughter he had made her be the daughter he needed. "Tell me what to do," she whispered. Aldous' face flooded with relief, and something colder underneath it, and he told her. He told her more than he should have, because he had never once had cause to fear her. The betrothal feast, the great hall, the old doors that barred from the outside, and the pitch and the oil carried down from his East Tower cellar and laid ready in the undercroft below, and the fire that would take the king and the doubting lord and the whole rotten treaty together and leave the North open for better men. He needed only a hand inside the hall to see the far doors barred when the moment came. Her hand. A gardener no one would think to watch. "You will be saving the North," he told her. "Remember that, whatever you hear." "I'll remember," she said, and it was the truest thing she had said all day. What came after came very fast, and Sorrel moved through it the way she moved through a killing frost, quickly and without stopping to feel. She did not go to the hall. She went to Ansel, whom she found at the head of the servants' stair, and she said 4 words: "The pitch, the undercroft, tonight." And she watched the spare, hard soldier become in an instant the thing he truly was. She went down herself with 2 of the king's men to the undercroft beneath the great hall and showed them the pitch stacked against the old dry timbers, because she knew the bones of this hold as no soldier ever could. every drain and passage and forgotten door of it, having tended its grounds for 11 years. And when Aldous came down at the appointed hour with a torch in his hand and murder on his kind old face, it was not a barred hall full of trapped royalty he found waiting. It was Sorrel, standing between him and the stairs, with the king's men at her back. "You," he said, and for the first time in her life she saw what had always been under the fatherly smile. "After everything I gave you." "You gave me a trowel," Sorrel said, "and a lie to grow in. I've dug up worse." And she stepped aside and let the king's men take him, and did not look away while they did it, because he had taught her, at least, not to flinch. They put the fire out before it was ever lit. They took Aldous and the pitch, and the letters that were not letters, and the plot came apart in an hour because the one hand inside it had turned, and the king lived, and the North held, and none of it, not one moment of it, was any of Sorrel's doing for love. Emmerich found her after, in the emptied undercroft, when it was over. He was pale, and there was ash on his fine clothes, and he looked at her, as though she were the only lit thing in a dark country. "You saved my life," he said. "After everything I did, you still—" "I stopped a traitor," Sorrel said. "It was my house he meant to burn, and my king. Whatever else my king is. It was duty. Do not make it into more than it was." "The bond," he began. "I know." She was so tired. "It is real. I believe you. It does not change one thing I said upstairs." She met his eyes and made herself say the last of it plainly, because he deserved plainness even if he deserved nothing else. "I am glad you are alive, Emmerich. You will be a good king, I think, if they let you. But I looked at you every day and loved a man who was not there, and you let me. I cannot walk back into that and call it mended because you nearly died. Trust is not a thing you get back by bleeding. I do not know if I will ever trust you again. I do not think I will." She saw it land in him, the understanding that he had broken a thing that saying sorry would not set, and she took no pleasure in it at all, which surprised her. "Sorrel, please," he said. "I will do anything." "I know," she said gently. "That is the trouble with kings. You always can." And she walked out, up into the cold air of a hold that had not burned, and left him standing in the ash. She was keeper of Ashmere within the season, and she was good at it, and she had always known she would be. The hold was a different place by spring. Aldous sat in a cell under the very east tower where he had hoarded his stores, the long rot he had worked into the house cut out clean, and the missing grain accounted for at last. And the coin that had bled north for 2 years turned back to mending roofs and filling stores. The young king had done that, quietly, from a distance, and Ashmere had begun, grudgingly and then not grudgingly at all, to love him for it. He had not sealed the betrothal. Lady Celestine had gone back to the coast a free woman, and had written Sorrel one letter on her way, a single line that said only, "Thank you for keeping the thing that lived for no purpose, and I hope you will let someone keep you the same way." Sorrel had kept the letter. She had not yet decided what to do about the last part of it. There was the matter of the bond, which did not care in the least what she had decided. She kept it shut all that winter, the way a person banks a fire they mean to let go out, and she learned the thing no one had ever thought to warn her of, which was that a bond left closed does not wither. It only aches. It sat under her ribs through the short, dark days, a low, steady pull toward a man 3 days' ride to the south, and some nights she woke certain that he was awake too, aching back at her across all that cold country, and she hated that the certainty was almost certainly true. She told herself it would fade. She had told herself a great many things that year. The bond, like the white flower on her sill the autumn before, declined to argue the point and simply went on being exactly what it was. Because the king had spent that whole winter trying to win her back, and he had gone about it in the one way she had not been braced for. He did not send jewels. He did not send a decree. On the first mild morning of the year, Sorrel came down to the Garden of Honor to find the Alpha King of all the North on his knees in her far corner bed, in a plain gray coat gone dark at the cuffs with good black soil, pulling weeds. "You're doing it wrong," she said, because she could not help it. "I'm doing it slowly," Emmerich said, not looking up, "so that it takes longer, so that I am here longer. It's the only clever thing I've thought of in months." He sat back on his heels and looked at her, and there was dirt on his face, on the face that was on every coin in the North, and no circlet anywhere in sight. "I know I cannot buy it back, so I thought I would earn it the way a nobody earns his supper, an hour at a time, in the dirt, where I was happy." She sent him away. He came back the next day. She set him the worst tasks she had, the mucking and the hauling, the way she had that first autumn, and he did all of them, a king with a bad back and blistered hands and a court 3 days' ride away that must have thought him mad, and he never once complained, and he never once presumed. He did not touch her. He did not ask. He only came and worked, and left when the light went, and came again. It became a thing the hold watched. It became, Sorrel suspected, a thing the whole North heard about eventually, the boy king who spent his springs weeding a border garden for a woman who would not have him. Linnet thought it was the finest joke in the world and also wept about it twice. Emmett, whom he had pulled out from under a falling scaffold, worshipped him openly. The wolfhound that bit everyone lay in the sun at the end of the row all day long, waiting for him, and Sorrel understood the feeling and resented understanding it. The morning that undid the most of her resolve, he did not know she was watching. She had come down before the light and stopped in the shadow of the gate. Old Garin had wandered into the beds again, lost as he always was now, further gone than he had been the autumn before, and Emmerich had set down his spade and gone to him exactly as he had that first day. Only this time Garin did not know him for a king or a gardener or anything at all, and was frightened of him, and the king of all the North sat down in the cold dirt beside a terrified old servant and stayed there, talking low and easy about nothing, about the weather and the roots and the turning of the year, until the fear went out of the old face and Garin fell asleep against his shoulder in the thin sun. And Emmerich sat very still so as not to wake him, dirt to the elbow, a crick coming into his back, a king pinned to the ground by a sleeping servant that no one else in all the world had time for, and he looked from the shadow of the gate, entirely content to stay there the whole of the day. Sorrel went back to her rooms without letting him see her, and wept for the first time since the Undercroft, and could not for the life of her have told you whether it was grief or the end of grief. He asked her once a day in 100 small, unpresuming ways, and every day she told him to ask again tomorrow. "Why?" he said one evening at the gate, dirt to the elbow, the light going gold. "Not to argue. I'll come tomorrow whatever you say. I only want to know why you let me come at all if the answer is no." Sorrel looked at him a long while, at the dirt under a king's nails, at the man who had made himself, 1 hour at a time, back into the only version of himself she had ever been allowed to love, and had done it not to trick her this time, but in the full light of day, where everyone could see him fail. "Because a portrait can't kneel in the mud," she said at last. "I called you a portrait that eats, that first day. A thing that hangs on a wall and takes, and never once puts its hands in the dirt for anyone." She swallowed. "It's very hard to go on hating a portrait that shows up every morning and weeds your beds until its hands bleed. That's why I let you come. You keep ruining a perfectly good grievance." He laughed, wet and startled, and did not step toward her, because he had learned. And Sorrel, who had spent 11 years being no one's, and 1 winter being a fool, and one spring being courted by a king on his knees in her own garden, felt the last of the frost go out of the ground in her chest. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. But this time she smiled when she said it, and they both heard the difference, and it was the difference between a door barred and a door only closed. In the end, it took him the rest of that year. He asked in the garden until Linnet threatened to charge him rent. He asked on the east wall with 2 cups of cocoa gone cold in his hands because he had talked too long working up to it. He asked in front of the whole council once, by accident, having forgotten they were in the room, which cost him a great deal of dignity and gained him, Sorrel admitted only to herself, a great deal of ground. He asked near the end, by simply doing her worst chore before she woke, so that she came down one gray morning to find the cold frames already mended and no one there to take the credit for it. Only a single white bloom left on the sundial, the same stubborn kind that flowered too near the frost, the very kind she had once nearly left on a stranger's windowsill and lost her nerve. He had remembered that. She had never told him. The bond, it seemed, had told him things. He asked badly and beautifully, and once with an armful of flowers cut from her own far corner, which she pointed out was technically theft, and he said a king could not be a thief in his own realm, and she said the garden was hers and not his realm. And he conceded the point at once and gave the flowers back, which was somehow the moment she knew. She could not have told you why that was the moment, the flowers going back into her arms without a fight. Perhaps because a man who wanted only to win would have let her keep them and counted it a point scored. This one had heard her call a thing hers and set it down at once, the way he had set down every scrap of the power he had spent his whole life being told was the only part of him worth a glance. He had come to her with nothing in his hands again, on purpose this time, in the full light of day. It had taken her a year to believe he meant it, and 11 years before that to become the sort of woman who could tell the difference. She thought her whole strange life had perhaps been teaching her exactly that one skill, how to know a true thing grown for no reason from a fine thing grown for a purpose, and she was, in the end, very good at her work. She said yes on an ordinary morning, over black bread, with no one watching, when he had stopped bracing for it, when he asked only out of the habit his whole year had made of asking. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, and watched it take a moment to reach him, and watched his whole face come apart when it did. They were wed in the garden of honor, among the flowers grown for no reason but that they should live, and the whole north came to see the boy king. Nobody had trusted Mary, the keeper of Ashmere, who had seen the man before she ever saw the crown, and had loved the one and not the other, and had made him spend a year proving the crown had a man inside it worth the loving. He wept during the vows. She had known he would. She did not, quite. But the bond gave her away regardless, the way it always did now, warm and traitorous under her ribs. And he laughed at her through his own tears, and she stopped caring who saw. "You chose me when I had nothing," he said, when it was done, forehead against hers. "You are the only soul alive who did. I will spend the whole of my reign making certain you never once regret it." "You had everything," Sorrel said. "You only had the sense to hide it, which is the single cleverest thing you've ever done, and you should know I've never quite forgiven you for it." "I know." He was smiling. "Ask me again tomorrow." "That's my line," she said, and kissed him, and for once did not argue. So whose fault was it? In the end, you may decide that for yourself. Blame the courtiers who never once looked him in the eye, so that he had to walk out of his own castle to be seen. Blame the treaty, or the throne, or the long cold habit of a boy raised to be a crown before he was ever allowed to be a person. Or blame, if you like, a woman on her knees in the mud who told a hooded stranger exactly what she thought of his king, and in doing so became the first person in his life to hand him the truth, for no reason, but that he ought to have it. She would tell you it was his fault. All of it. Every bit. And he would tell you, gladly to his last day, that she was entirely right.